to remember that. So does my next guest, I'm sure. Jonah Goldberg, editor in chief of the Dispatch. Follow him at Jonah Goldberg. Jonah, you're on Skype. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm doing this from my car.
Well, it's
So,
because
wait,
are people asleep?
no, we got work. My wife and daughter are asleep, and we got workmen in the house. So I couldn't give you the quality audio that I know you've come to expect
Oh,
from me.
I've done
So,
so many. I've done so many radio interviews from my car in my garage that it amuses me. Jonah, I'm going to put you on the spot. I called you because I want you to talk about Woodrow Wilson, and I'm going to get to
yeah,
that. But before that, I'm going to put you on the spot. You know Harry Potter, right? Have you read Harry Potter? Have you seen the movies? Did your children love Harry
I've seen a
Potter?
couple of the movies. I never read the Harry Potter books, but I know of Harry Potter. Sure, yeah.
You have not read the Harry Potter books?
I'm amazed by this response from people. I would rather read Lord of the Rings again for maybe the third time than read Harry Potter for the first time. It's just me. I'm sorry. It's just me.
Well, then you're of no. I was going to have you help me sort the justices of the Supreme Court into the Hogsworth houses. Are you?
I could not possibly do that. I'd be better to do with the royal houses of England, like who's a Tudor and who's a Stuart, and even
Oh
that
my
I wouldn't
God!
do
Well,
well.
that would you call David French and have him address this because I put the Chief Justice and Clarence Thomas in Gryffindor, but you are wholly inadequate to the task of helping me.
Totally inadequate. Like
All right.
literally, I've heard the words Gryffindor. I do not know what it signifies.
Okay, well, Raven, it's the Courageous House. Ravenclaw, which is the Brainiac house, has got Gorsuch, Ginsburg, and Alito in it. But beyond that, I don't know who to put into Slytherin and Hufflepuff. I need help. I'll call David French. Jonah, I first learned about the dark side of Woodrow Wilson from you
Yes.
in your book on fascism, liberal fascism. Would you explain to people why it is appropriate for Princeton to change the name and why, in the White House as we speak, they are debating recommending to the board of the Wilson Center to change that institution's name to the Moynihan Center?
Sure. Well, first of all, taking the second one first, because Moynihan was awesome and he actually believed the things that we usually attribute to Woodrow Wilson.
Yes, yes.
Uh, um, there's a lot of myth making about Woodrow Wilson about he was this champion of democracy. We're all taught in high school he was a champion of what we called self determination. What usually gets left out of that is what he meant by self determination wasn't necessarily democracy. For advanced races, biologically advanced races, democracy was great. But if there were other countries that just wanted a nationalist dictator who spoke in the authentic voice of the people, that was self determination too. So he was not the small d Democrat that people ascribe to him. But more broadly, look, I mean, I I don't, and I think we're on the same page on this. I don't like the moral panic that we're in right now. It's certainly better when committees think these things through with a process rather than letting mobs do it. So, kudos to Princeton and these other places for at least having a process. But, Woodrow, one of the reasons there are a bunch of criteria for why Wilson is different than other figures from the past. And one of them is that, look, there are things that Abraham Lincoln said about race that today hit the ear very bad. But
Yes, in
what
the
but
Lincoln
Abraham
Douglas debates. Yes.
yeah, but Abraham Lincoln was nonetheless very advanced for his age, but for his time, both in terms of what he was fighting for and what he was trying to do for African American people, but also in his beliefs. And he grew. Woodrow Wilson was retrograde for his time. He was the first Southern Southerner since Reconstruction to be elected president of the United States. He wanted to restore the worst, harshest forms of Jim Crow. The Dixiecrats thought he was going to do it throughout the South, and he couldn't do that, but he did do it for Washington, D.C. and the federal government. He brought back hardcore racial discrimination in the federal government. When the rest of the country was going another direction, he wanted to go back. He lamented that the South lost the Civil War. He really admired Abraham Lincoln for his what we would call his abuses of power. His ends justify the means, suspending habeas corpus and all that. Wilson liked Lincoln for those things. He liked he liked Lincolnian means. He just hated Lincolnian ends. He didn't
Yeah.
want to see the slaves freed, which is like getting it's so morally backward. Um, and so so on the race front, if we're in a time of purging institutions of their association with racists and segregationists, Wilson definitely falls afoul in ways that others don't. but he was also the first president in the United States to ever campaign openly against the Bill of Rights. He didn't like the U.S. Constitution. He thought it was a dead letter. Um, he was also, in many ways a tyrant. He put thousands of political prisoners in jail. He he had the first modern propaganda ministry in Western civilization, the Committee for Public Information.
He
He put
genuinely mishandled his pandemic. I mean, he genuinely blew the pandemic.
very much so, very much so, and so there's almost no standard by which you can say. I mean, like there were good things that happened under Wilson, but one of my great frustrations about the historiography of Wilson is that whenever bad things happen on Wilson's watch, all of a sudden Wilson kind of disappears into the woodwork, and it was uh, Deputy Attorney General Palmer or somebody in his administration who did bad things, and then when things get good again, Wilson reappears, and it's just not the way it actually worked in real
Well,
life.
Jonah, I have a theory on this. I think it's because he was the president of Princeton. He gets a pass
Uh,
on everything. I think that just basically is the shortcut for people who don't want to read the history. And certainly it was my default position. He won World War I, and he must have been smart. He was from New Jersey. I didn't know he was a Southerner. I was just talking with Robert Costa. If you're a Northerner like I am, I'm from Lake Erie, right? And you are a Northerner from New York City. You're not
right.
really aware growing up of the Confederacy stuff in the South. And indeed, the whole idea that these bases were named for Confederate generals really never hit me until recently. I've been
Yeah,
reading
no, me
about Fort
neither.
Bragg for years. I just drove past Fort AP Hill and I realized, my God, he was trying to destroy the Union. That guy would have
Yeah,
killed Lincoln in 5 seconds. Why do we have a single base? Now, the president is fighting it because the mob is for it. You just articulated why the president is fighting it. And he hates this tearing down of statues as I do. But if you adopt a good rule and then apply the rule, that's the way to do it. And the rule ought to be we don't celebrate stone cold races, especially those of the 20th century, even those of the Confederacy. We are more forgiving of stone cold racists of the 18th century because that racism goes back in time as far as the millenniums go. And
right.
Jefferson and Washington put us on the path, the Declaration of Independence, to getting rid of racism and slavery. But Wilson is a 20th century racist. He should go. And the carrier, the Stennis, that should be renamed. And I know this is being discussed in the White House as well. The Frederick Douglass. Would you approve of something like that, Jonah, even though we are in a moral panic? Because John Stennis was a stone cold racist.
Yeah, I would approve of something like that. I am wholeheartedly in favor of making meaningful distinctions, and the one of the reasons why it's such a crazy moment. Look, when we are memory holding 20-year-old episodes of Golden Girls, you know that we are not making fine distinctions.
True.
And but yes, no, absolutely. It's like with the statues. There were statues that were put up in the 1960s as a middle finger to the civil rights movement after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, where they start celebrating, these Confederates as a way to signal that they're not going to go along with this stuff. That stuff should go. I mean, it should go in a process. It shouldn't be torn down. It should none of that stuff. But those things should go. Statues that were put up to commemorate things 150 years ago, much more like a case by case basis.
Uh,
But I agree with
like
you.
like there was a soldier in Alexandria, in Old Town, a single Confederate soldier staring at the ground, put up to commemorate a long time ago. It's been taken down, by the way. But I always was ambivalent about that because it was a single Confederate soldier. He might have been conscripted. He certainly probably didn't own slaves. He was not rich. That was a thing like that. But he fought for his state and he was misguided and all that. I always sort of was ambivalent about that one. But Fort AP Hill, absolutely freaking not. Now, Jonah, talk to me a little bit about, and this is a tough question. I asked George Will this earlier this week. After the decision yesterday in Montana versus Espinoza, is it not dispositively proven that religious liberty is better off for Donald Trump having been elected president than it would have been had Hillary Clinton been elected president?
I'm not super comfortable with the contrafactual. I just don't know. I certainly think there are things that President Trump did that Hillary Clinton wouldn't, that are definitely to Donald Trump's favor. Um, I also I think that some ways, though, like what the Supreme Court has been doing of late with John Roberts, is a reaction to Donald Trump that would not have happened were he not president behaving the way that he does. But yeah, on things like religious liberty, I think, at the end of the day, uh, despite the sort of dynamic scoring you have to do to figure these things out, Donald Trump is definitely better than Hillary Clinton, certainly on the substance of it. Absolutely.
And not just better. I mean, on the issues which animate evangelical America and Roman Catholic Orthodox America, and I assume Orthodox Jewry, Donald Trump has delivered for them the protections via the appointments of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh that they would otherwise be denied. And they would have lost those because the 4 liberals on the court voted against religious liberty yesterday in the most important religious liberty decision. And I've been teaching this for 25 years since the great error, as David French calls it, Scalia's decision in Employment Division versus Smith of, I think, 1990. So I think it's just positive.
I think that's right. My only problem with this sort of thing is taking these things. I think you're right. I think, or at least you're on firm ground there. My only point is that taking these things in isolation can be problematic in the sense that Donald Trump is also making large chunks of the conservative cause less popular, earning less sympathy for it from persuadable voters. When you lose the suburbs, which he won in 2016, when you're losing them by 20 points, that is a bad sign for the long-term health of the conservative movement. It's a bad sign.
I think that he's got to change to get that. I got to get one more question in before we go. In your opinion, did the demonstrations that were not only inevitable but probably necessary following the murder of George Floyd, did they contribute to the resurgence of the pandemic in a significant way?
I think as just a matter of intuition and common sense, I think you have to say yes. You look at the explosion in young cases. I know that there are some counterexamples. In Minnesota, it wasn't from protests, it was from bars being open. But as a general sense, I think absolutely. I think the larger damage from those protests in terms of the COVID part is the absolute discrediting of the epidemiological establishment to be taken seriously, because the second you say these rules are really important, will save lives, so you shouldn't do the things that you really care about, but the things that we really care about, it's a free-for-all. And so there's now just a large constituency on the left and right that will not listen to these people. They sold their credibility for a little sort of woke profile in response to a truly horrific thing, and you can't get that toothpaste back into the tube. If you said, going to church or your parents' funeral, that is a selfish thing that is going to get people killed. But going out for day 11 of protests, that is an honorable and glorious thing and should be allowed to do it. You can't have those kinds of double standards and expect to have credibility going forward.
Read the Washington Post editorial this morning on this, because I am completely convinced the pandemic is back because of these demonstrations. At least half of it has the surges to that. But I'd like to read what you write in the Dispatch this week. Jonah Goldberg, it's good to see you in your car. Go back inside. Be